All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion today. My name is Urszula Wyss, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. And we are coming together here from different professional contexts and different parts of the world, which is really exciting. And I am really looking forward to the discussions that we get to have today. So today's topic is going to be about meeting students' basic needs to support learning engagement in primary or elementary classrooms. And that is because we know that teaching is about so much more than just delivering content, especially in today's day and age. Before a child can think, connect with new ideas, something even more fundamental has to be in place. They need to feel safe, they need to feel seen, and in many cases, they simply just need to not be hungry. This panel today brings together three incredible professionals who approach this reality from different angles. And I am really looking forward to seeing where today's discussion goes, to feel the richness in today's discussion, and to hear from every single one of them because they all have unique perspectives to bring. By the end of this discussion, we hope that you will be able to explain how unmet physiological and emotional needs affect students' readiness to learn, to be able to identify classroom behaviors that signal those unmet needs and apply strategies to respond. And finally, you'll be able to evaluate how equity-focused practices can create conditions for all students, that is, including the most vulnerable, to engage meaningfully in learning. Today, we have three fantastic panelists, and we have Lara, who is a psychologist whose work centers on child development and emotional well-being. We have Mike, who is head of grade 3 and who brings a perspective of someone who does this every single day in the classroom. And then we have Ms. Hema, who is a senior lecturer and program director in education, and her research goes beyond teacher preparation, also into work with refugees and underserved communities. I'll let each panelist quickly introduce themselves by just sharing where they're coming from, and then we will move into our discussion. I'll be guiding the questions, and then we'll leave space at the very end for our audience to also share their questions. Let's begin with Lara. I'll hand over to you first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ursula. Thank you for your hard work and organizing even this discussion and for the invitation. I'm Lara. I work as a child psychologist specialized in behavior therapy. And in my scope of work, I think we often see children who are being blamed for their behaviors, and yet most of the time they are really actually crying for help. And I think today's panel discussion is so important to actually understand the surface level expressions of the kids and discuss what happens beneath those behaviors.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lara, for that quick introduction. Let's move on to Ms. Hema.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Ula, for the invitation and for having me here. My name is Hema Lechamanan. I am a senior lecturer and program director at the School of Education, Taylor's University. Besides teaching, I have also been running two initiatives for the past 6 years. One on reading with children from underprivileged families, and the other is a refugee teacher training program with teachers of refugees in alternative learning centers in Malaysia.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Mr. Mike, the floor is yours.
All right, Ula, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. I don't know if you said this, but I'm coming from Malaysia right now. I'm teaching in Malaysia currently. I have a master's in education. I'm going on 15 years of international school teaching, but I've also taught in the United States in public schools. I've taught, I feel like the whole spectrum. I've taught very low income to extremely high income, and I've taught, goodness, pre-K 3 through grade 12 at some point, at least for one day in my career. So I feel like I've at least seen and done a little bit of it all.
That is fantastic. Wow. I didn't know that your experience spanned that far in like across the K to 12. So thank you so much. for your introductions. Let's go ahead and start straight away with our very first topic. First, we're going to talk about how unmet basic needs affect readiness to learn. And this theme kind of explores something that sits at the heart of every single classroom morning. Before we can teach, children need to be ready to learn. And that readiness is not always in the children's control, nor is it necessarily in our control. So, Lara, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. From a child development perspective, how do unmet basic needs such as hunger, stress, emotional insecurity affect a child's ability to focus and regulate their emotions and engage in learning in a primary classroom?
Thank you, Ursula, for the question. So from a psychological and even a broad developmental standpoint, the basic physiological needs are definitely the basis of all kinds of further development in life, right? And we're not just referring to children, we're referring to all human beings of all ages, animals, plants, even microorganisms. And I do want to dive in more into a therapy model. We call it neurosequential model. It is a perspective that explains why children behave the way that they do, especially on the neural level, right? So this model usually sees the brain as having three levels. The most important one is the brainstem. And the brainstem usually even develops from the first 25 days from pregnancy. It is responsible for the senses, for survival, for autonomic reflexes. Then we have the limbic brain or the emotional brain, which is responsible for attachments and relational skills. And then we get to the last part, which is the cortical brain, which is responsible for thinking and learning and language. Bear in mind that it's a bottom-up process. It is hierarchical brain development. So first you need the need of the brainstem, the senses to be regulated, and then you get the limbic brain, and then you can get to the cortical, a calm cortical brain. And these parts are able to actually develop and form based on life experiences, based on environment, based on if the needs are met or not met. And we call this neuroplasticity, right? The more we go up the levels, the more the cortical area would be neuroplastic. But the more we go down to the levels, the main important part, which is the brainstem, we see higher resistance to neuroplasticity. And let's take an example. For example, if the brainstem is regulated and the limbic, the emotional part is regulated, then now the cortex, the cortical part, the cognitive part is in control, right? Which puts the child in a calm state, a state where they can reflect, regulate, be active in learning, engage in learning, and have active cognition in general. Let's take the example when the limbic brain, the emotional brain, has not met its needs. We say that the limbic brain is in alert or alarming mode. So it puts the child in a state to be reactive, emotional, fight or free situation. And then when we get to the third example, which is when the brainstem is not regulated at all, we call it a danger mode. So there are no needs being met. The autonomic reflex comes out and it will put the child in a fight situation. So now the brain is prioritizing survival, right? So it inhibits all kind of emotional regulation. It inhibits all kind of the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for decision-making, for logic. And hence we can see that we can have aggression, withdrawal, anxiety, which is also leading to shorter attention span, limited learning, more reactive and impulsive behaviors. So yes, definitely the basic physiological needs, when they are not met, we can see even from brain anatomy and science that we cannot expect the brainstem to be regulated, we cannot expect the limbic system to be balanced, and definitely we cannot expect the child to have a cognitively active cortex.
Wow, that was an incredible insight into science and like an understanding of how a child develops and how we all develop. And I can definitely personally relate to that when I myself can't regulate if I'm feeling like I'm in fight or flight. And I must imagine that for a child, that is even harder because they don't have that life experience to practice
They
that.
don't have the skills yet.
So, yeah, so that's a really good bridge to our next question to Mike, because you're in the classroom every day, right? And so when you think kind of about a typical morning in your grade 3 classroom and your students, what does a child who is not ready to learn actually look like? And what is your instinct from a teacher's perspective in that moment?
All right. Well, it can look a lot of ways. And I feel like we have to be, as teachers, a bit of detectives because students aren't always aware of, that maybe they're just tired or they're not ready to learn or whatever. So one thing I always recommend to all teachers is make sure to say good morning to every student every day. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the reasons, which we're talking about tonight, is you can almost get a little assessment of how they're doing that morning. If they if they show physical signs of tiredness or sickness or whatever, you can see that. You can see the head's hanging or the eyes aren't all the way open, or maybe they're just not as cheerful as normal. It can be any number of things. They're hungry, whatever. So that first clue is really good to take in, at least give you a little inventory in the morning. But it can look so many different ways, and getting to know your students really helps that. So you can see differences in the patterns and differences in behaviors. Just a few examples. I gave some physical ones, but also some students can be really chatty, and that might mean they aren't ready to learn. Maybe they're feeling nervous or anxious or lonely because their father's on business trip for the next week and they don't get to see him. So changes in patterns seem to be the biggest indicator for me. Of course, also physical things like being, looking tired, like I said. My instinct generally is to kind of redirect. I think often kids that, like I said, are missing their parent or they're just feeling down because the friendship isn't working well is, okay, my thought is this is a problem we can work on. This is a problem we can fix. So kind of getting them out of that just slump of like feeling bad about something can kind of be helpful. Just redirect into like, ooh, I can't wait to see what you're going to do with this question in math or something like that. And giving them that attention can help, but not always. I think you need to have a comfortable learning space. You need to make sure that your students feel safe in your classroom. And if they are feeling down, there's a corner or an area they can go to just be alone. Because we can't always just chat with our children. I think that's one, I don't want to say misconception, but one thing that people often say is, oh, just talk to your kids if you notice that they're not feeling well or they're looking sad. But when you have 15, 16, 20 other kids in the room, you often can't have those long one-on-one talks that you would love to have. So what I think we need to do is get the needs met, whatever they are. So going back to being a detective, okay, well, why are they hanging their head low today? Or why are they less chatty than normal? What's going on? And sometimes you can just quickly say to them, hey, you seem a little different today. What's going on? But sometimes it's not that easy. So occasionally I just kind of shoot from the dark, I guess I would say, is, hey, did you eat breakfast today? Or have you drank any water yet? Or just kind of aim for things that maybe didn't happen or maybe that they need. Or you could say, depending on your relationship with your class, but I usually am pretty open with my kids. And I'll say, did you get enough sleep last night or whatever? So you can kind of just quiz them and go through different things. Often I find that they maybe are hungry. And so I do let students eat in my classroom. We kind of have some rules about it, but I know not everybody has time to eat in the morning, especially if they have before school sports. So as long as we have some agreed upon rules, they have to finish within about 20 minutes and if they can't eat while using a laptop, things like that. But I try to, again, going back to what I said, I try to make everybody as comfortable as possible so that later in the year or just whenever they'll feel like, okay, I can go talk to Mr. Mike. I can let him know there's a problem, something like that. Let me see. Let me just check my notes here. I'm pretty open about letting kids sleep, letting them drink water, letting them eat, like I said, because I think if you fight that, you're not going to win. If somebody's hungry or tired or thirsty, no matter what, they need that. Those are so important to just being able to function. So yeah, that's what I've got for now.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Well, something that like really popped out to me that I absolutely agree with is teachers have to be detectives and like try and figure out what's going on. And I kind of like that you have a mental checklist and you're like, okay, is it food? Is it water? Is it sleep? Is it maybe a parent being gone? There's just so many things that could be on. And yeah, the longer one teaches, the more of a detective one becomes.
Can I add just
So
one thing there,
yeah,
Ula?
go ahead.
Um, being the detective, I would advise anybody to get as much help as you can get. Get to know the parents, get to know your school counselor, get to know
Interviews.
former teachers, so that, those patterns I was talking about, you can already be aware of them even before a student joins your class.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Can
So
I comment on something?
go ahead. Yeah.
When Mike was saying about it's very hard to make children stop, it's very true because it's still at this primary age, it's still the linguistic part of their brain is not well developed, right? So there are a few things that I like to do which work for me. So I want to tell it to you also. Usually I say, let's use the remote of the mind. I have actually a remote in my room, or you can use any gadget and you can give the remote to the child. And you can say, okay, we will play the story or we will play the movie, and it's under your control to pause if it's painful, to rewind a happy thing, or to fast forward whenever it feels unpleasant, right? So now the child feels that, okay, I can start expressing, but when I want to stop, I'm going to stop. No one is forcing me, right? Or another one, some children also like to express through art, through drawing, through painting. There's my favorite one, we call it the heart art. So you can just draw a heart and you can color code. For example, red is for love, blue is for happiness, yellow is for sadness, and etc. And then you can say, okay, fill out your heart. And you can see some children who are having some sad moments, they can just color most of it the sad color, which is yellow, and then a bit of love. So this is a way of expression. We are just giving them different means to express, even if not just words, right? And this really helps. And you can do them all, for example, on Monday and on a Friday, and you can compare the hearts and the emotions. This is for a detective also, for us to know, in parallel for the child to know, to be aware of themselves, right?
Yeah, those are some really good suggestions. And I like how they're like detective tools. So let's go ahead and merge these practical suggestions with a theoretical framework that is pretty widely acknowledged, and especially in the educational field. So Ms. Hema, I think this is going to go to you, this question, because you do teach teachers and teach this as part of your courses. So there's a lot of research on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is essentially a pyramid that says that there are certain needs that need to be met before a child can learn. And it's been widely applied and widely critiqued as well. How useful do you find this theoretical model of thinking about what children actually need before they can learn? And are there maybe any other theoretical lenses that you could recommend, maybe tying in with some of the practical thoughts that we've shared so far?
Yes, thank you, Una. I think Maslow's hierarchy remains useful as a starting point because it reminds us that learning is embodied, it's all encompassing. So a child does not enter the classroom as purely cognitive being, and this draws on what Lara said earlier also. So they come in hungry, tired, anxious, feeling unsafe, distracted, or carrying responsibilities from home. I've met a lot of students, especially teenagers in secondary school, who have to complete household chores, come to school, and then go on and do part-time work to support their families. And then the next day, repeat the same routine. So, in this sense, Maslow helps teachers ask a very important question. What is happening in this child's life that may be making learning difficult today? And this goes back to what Mike said about asking questions, even questions like, have you eaten? Did you sleep well last night? But I would not treat Maslow as a rigid staircase where one's need must be fully met before another can begin. It's not that hierarchical. In real classrooms, children often learn while their needs are still unmet. So you cannot, in reality, you cannot meet all these needs and then start learning. So, for refugee children, for example, or children from low-income families, or children experiencing instability, they cannot wait until life becomes secure before they learn. Often it's parallels happening at the same time. So they often learn in the middle of all of this uncertainty. And so the framework then, Maslow's hierarchy, becomes problematic if we interpret it too mechanically, too hierarchically. And I find frameworks like ecological frameworks or relational frameworks more helpful. Bronfenbrenner, for example, Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory helps us see that a child's learning is shaped by home, school, community, policy, migration status, poverty, social support, the different systems, and the interrelation between how one affects the other. I also find ethics of care useful because it reminds us that teaching is not about only about delivering content, but about creating that relationship of trust, recognition, and safety. And only when this relationship is in place, learning can happen. So for me, Maslow is a useful moral reminder, but not enough as a standalone educational theory. We need frameworks that are more relational, contextual, and also sensitive to inequality.
Yeah. Wow. That is so deep. And I like just looking at all three of your responses so far, it just keeps going back to how education is not clear cut. There are so many elements that impact education, that impact teaching, everywhere from what it takes for a learner to be able to be ready to learn, as well as how to build relationships with students and the importance of those relationships. And it always blows my mind to see how much more there is to learn about education and how complex it is. So let's go ahead and take that thought into our next kind of topic, into our next theme, where we are working on recognizing signs of unmet needs and responding in the moment. And I think Mike has like kind of touched on that a little bit, and let's go ahead and see if we can go even deeper, because this is where we can really get practical with it and find ways that we can support children. So Mike, in your experience as a grade 3 teacher, what are some very specific examples of classroom behaviors that signal that a student might not be ready to learn because maybe a basic need is unmet? And how do you respond in that moment? So you've kind of given us some tips already. Can you give us some very clear examples that you have?
Yeah, definitely. I already pointed out some general ones, and one that I didn't point out that I actually have seen a lot this academic school year is high energy. And that I believe is more of like an anxiety, a nervousness. It could be an attention thing, but you wouldn't think of that as like, oh, they need something. That usually kids are excited to see their friends, but not always. And so that's something I've addressed a lot this year is, okay, I see you're wiggling around a lot, or I see you're talking really loudly, or I see you're whatever it is, almost running around the classroom right when they arrive in the morning. And that definitely is a signal to me as well. So that's a specific example. And really, the best way I've found to deal with that situation specifically is just a quick chat. Like, I've got to have it because you're bouncing around the room, and we can't have that, because then if anybody else sees that, they're gonna think, oh, I get to run around the room, which looks fun, of course. But I wanted to kind of touch on something that Laura said when she was talking about the heart and the colors and doing things, I think drawing, or writing. And as a teacher, something that we can do is have a little bit of morning work. Like sometimes you have 5 minutes at the beginning of the day, and a way to get to reach all those 15 or 20 or 25 students is if you have a question on the board, like as simple as how are you feeling today? Or, are you ready to learn? Or what would help you be ready to learn? And I always think it's okay to be just open and honest with students about things like that. I say things like, I'm feeling tired today. How are you all feeling? And I think that gives them a little bit of like, oh, it's okay to admit, that I'm not happy, or it's okay to admit that I'm not really feeling that great today. And
Yeah.
just being honest, I think is really important. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm just
Okay.
validating your point. That's a very good point. Thank you. Because
Yeah.
just as they are
Yeah.
humans, we are humans, right? So if we act,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
they see more than they hear. So if they are seeing how we are behaving, then they have the space to feel what they want to feel. They have the space to speak what they want to speak. So just be a model for them. That's it. So thank you for that
Yeah.
point. Yes.
Yeah, and that's, I'll just make another point or two on that is I'm always honest with my students. Well, I mean, I don't just use it as a therapy session, but I do tell them often, like, I'm not feeling it today, you guys. I feel really tired. Let's try to wake up or something. And one tricky thing is to do that in kid language. I think as adults, we kind of think, if we're talking about ourselves, we might use adult language, but you have to say like, whoa, I am grumpy today, and it's because I didn't get enough sleep, and I still feel a little bit hungry, so I can't wait for snack, but we've got to get this work done right now. So let's all just try to do it, even if we're not feeling our best. And then once they see you doing that, I feel like it opens up, like
Yeah.
you said, it opens them up to feeling comfortable to be honest about their feelings.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, some really great golden nuggets. And I love that you mentioned honesty, because I think sometimes as teachers, we're afraid to be honest because we think that we always have to be on, we always have to be perfect, we have to be the ones that show the kids that we are ready here. And we often feel like we have to hide our tiredness or pretend like everything is okay, even when sometimes life is falling apart for us too, because we're just human beings. So that's a really good point to move back to Lara. And Lara, you kind of started answering my next question anyway. The point that we're not trained therapists, right? And we don't always know what to do, but often we are the first ones to notice when something is wrong, just because we get to spend so much time with our students. And what is like the one thing that you would want every primary teacher to know about how to respond to a dysregulated child in a way that supports rather than escalates the situation? Because that can happen too.
Definitely. I do want to focus on the first part that you said, right? Teachers are not trained therapists. Definitely. And we don't expect you to be trained therapists at all. I do believe teaching, or in general parenting, it can be the easiest thing to give opinion about, but at the same time, the hardest thing to do in the world. What I try to remind teachers is that just the way you teach your children, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay if you make mistakes also. Sometimes we feel that, as you said, Ursula, that we need to be perfect and always high energy. No, you are just a human being also. Now to go to the question, let's talk about how teachers or even caregivers could notice a challenge and then how to respond to it. If I were a teacher, for example, of course, it's very normal that if I see a child acting out, my body will just go, not again, please, not today. I'm already having a bad day. Just let's finish the lesson, right? So our brain is so wired to judge or label something negative as a problem that we need to solve right now, right? But if we can just take a second and before reacting, just ask yourself, what am I missing? What's going on? Right? You will just give yourself some chance to be curious, just to observe without judging. And the reason why I say this is because behaviors are like the tip of the iceberg, right? You see just the end, you see just the outcome, but there is a lot of big weight underneath. And we cannot just judge the behavior. A good example of this is this statement also: the peak of happiness is crying and the peak of sadness is laughing, right? So the tip of the iceberg, but what's beneath the iceberg also. So there are battles underneath that iceberg that you cannot see. And sometimes we feel that, okay, as soon as we see the behaviors, again, if I were a teacher, I would be like, okay, I need to punish them, I need to give them a consequence. But ask yourself, do they really need a consequence, or they just need a practice of a better functional skill? And trust me, if a child, they can regulate themselves emotionally, definitely they will. They will not choose to be emotionally dysregulated, right? And if they cannot, it just means that we cannot expect them to know how to behave. Behaviors usually happen because expectations are placed on a child that are really above his or her capacity to respond. So there might have been a need, a difficulty, a gap, again, behind those behaviors. And if we really meet those needs, rather than just focusing on the behavior, then we can actually begin to focus on the cause, and not just the symptom. I want to again reiterate and look at this from the angle of neuroplasticity, right? From the brain that we said. The brain is built for development. The brain is built for curiosity and not just to be obedient, not just to use logic. It's built to be emotional and logical. So when a child is not listening, when a child is displaying some behaviors, it is a part of development also, not just disobedience. Maybe to explain further, let's take an example. Let's say there's a child that is really acting out. They are dysregulated. They are at unease for whatever reason, whether it's a home environment or in the classroom, something happened, or there's a test and the child cannot regulate themselves, fear of expectations. Again, what we usually are prone to do is directly intervene and teach them how to calm down, breathe to 10, right? But again, when someone is drowning, it's not the time to teach how to swim. So let's help them to be regulated, the brainstem, the limbic system, and then get to the cortical brain, and then we teach them the skills that they lack, right? So again, remember, bottom up, the brainstem. You can do exercises, maintain the body systems, maintain the senses, make sure that they are regulated, maybe some sensory play, sand, water, movements, music. When that is calm, then we can focus on the limbic, emotional part, connect to them emotionally, build relations, have fun, jokes, listen without judgment. And again, this is the emotional side, right? So this is where you can hear children say, I want to kill everyone, or I hate my parents, right? But it's okay, don't judge, because in this emotional phase, there's no logic anyways. So whatever they say, it's okay, let's not judge. So, and this is where the mirror neurons actually are really, really, really on fire. And this would help the child to mirror the energy that's around them, right? So that's why we say co-regulation. If we are regulated, it helps the child. I'm not saying it's a cause and effect. It helps the child regulate easier. Yeah, so just avoid using the sentence, for example, because I said so, right? Like, no, you cannot go there because I said so. Again, because here you're using logic. And at this part, as we said, we don't have logic yet. Once that's settled down, now we can be redirected to the cortical, to the cortex part. This is where we can ask questions. This is where we can draw boundaries. We can negotiate. We can expect them to come up with alternative solutions. We can expect, the language, the linguistic part of the brain to be merged with the cortical part of the brain, so they can actually talk. And as we said about the detective, right? The talking tools, they can use the remote of the mind, they can use the heart map. But as long as they are regulated, we will know how to go about from it. So my advice to teachers would be, just notice, let's not judge, ask yourself, what am I missing, right? And then from there, you will be in a calmer state to know how to deal with the child, for sure. And sometimes children just need to be accepted. They don't need any questions. They don't need anything. They just to be accepted, comforted, grounded, right? So from time to time, give praises whenever you can, reflect, make them feel seen, make them feel important, give them some responsibilities, some control. Just the way we say that we are what we eat, it's the same for them. They become what we feed their mind with.
Yeah. Wow.
I
So
think I
many,
talked a
so
lot,
many
sorry.
beautiful, no, so many beautiful insights. I love it. And something that really, really stuck out to me was when you said that children don't want to be dysregulated, and if they could, they would be they would be regulated, and that is just so deep. And that understanding of, you know, teachers need a certain skill set, and they need to have certain a certain regulation mechanism for themselves in order to be able to support children. And I think this is a beautiful point for Ms. Hema to then to build on, because I love how Lara was coming from a psychological perspective, and now teachers really need to be able to do that. So Ms. Hema, from a teacher preparation program perspective, because teacher preparation programs don't always equip teachers to respond to emotional and physiological needs of students. They do teach the theory, but what do you think needs to change at the level of teacher education so that responding to basic needs becomes part of how teachers are trained and that they don't become an afterthought or a thing that teachers have to figure out themselves?
It's a very important question, and I, when I read your question, Ula, I remember to my own training many years ago when I did my teacher training, and we learned about Maslow's hierarchy of need, but it was just a passing thing that you learn in one of your modules, and there was no extra information or preparation given to how we manage children's emotional needs, or how do we create a safe environment or create a safe classroom for children to feel seen, to feel respected, and I had to learn all of that during my teaching, and so as though I was put in a deep sea, and just have to learn on the go. And so I think teacher education, given my experience working with many student teachers, being a teacher myself, teacher education needs to stop treating children's emotional, physiological needs as peripheral to teaching. So these are not extra concerns. So these needs shape attention, participation, behavior, memory, confidence, language development. It shapes quite a lot of things. And if a child is hungry or exhausted or afraid, ashamed, that is not separate from learning. They can't really learn. So, and that is the condition under which, learning is expected to happen. And teachers have to be, or student teachers going into the classroom have to be prepared to handle this. So at the level of teacher education, we need to integrate basic needs into core pedagogical training, not only into one counseling or classroom management module. Future teachers need to learn how poverty, for example, or food insecurity, trauma, displacement, sleep, home literacy environments, family stress, all of these factors, how they affect learning. And this is important because only when they have this understanding, they are more prepared to learn with students who are coming into the classroom. And so therefore, teacher education should include things like child development that includes adversity. So not only ideal developmental milestones, trauma-informed and care-informed pedagogy. I think this particular thing is very important and it's missing in a lot of teacher education component. You probably will be able to comment on your teacher education preparation, Ula. Especially for children who are affected by poverty, grief, violence, displacement. We're not just talking about children from vulnerable population, children who go to private schools or international schools as well. They need caring from pedagogy as well. Classroom routines that create safety. So predictable structures, warm greetings, calm transitions, non-shaming behavior responses. And I think both Mike and Laura talked about this. Teacher noticing skills. It's a skill, and it's important that future teachers learn this skill so that they can recognize when disengagement may be linked to hunger or anxiety, exhaustion, lack of belonging, and not just, label students as lazy, not interested in learning. There may be other factors that are contributing to them being disengaged. Partnership with families and communities. So, and because teachers cannot respond to basic needs alone, so how do future teachers need to learn how to form this partnership, how to form this relationship with families and communities. So we need to train teachers not only to ask, why is this child not learning? But also, what is this child carrying into our classroom? And I also want to say, because it might look as though I'm placing quite a lot of responsibilities on the teacher. So we must be careful not to do that, not to place everything on teachers. So teachers need systems around them. Teacher education can prepare teachers to notice and respond but schools and state education or Ministry of Education must provide that referral system, meal programs, counseling support, special education support, and community partnership to support the teachers. So otherwise, we're asking teachers to compensate for structural inequality, and that puts excessive burden on the teachers.
Yeah, I really like how you shared that this is a lot of responsibility on teachers, and that there's more people than just a teacher involved in trying to help make sure that all of the children's needs are met. And at the same time, also realizing that children are so unique and their circumstances are incredibly unique, and it's very difficult to put them all in the same box and just think that, yes, while there are certain needs that are the same for everyone, you kind of made it clear that that children have very different needs depending on where they're coming from and what their environments are. So we've now talked in our first two key points, we've talked about what happens inside the child, what happens inside the classroom. And now let's go ahead and zoom out and see if we can look at the bigger picture, because like we've kind of established, not all children arrive at school with the same starting point. And that matters enormously for how we teach. And so Ms. Hema, you kind of started that off, and let's go ahead and continue with you for as we go into our final theme on equity-focused practices for vulnerable learners. So you've kind of mentioned you work with refugee communities and underserved learners. What have you observed about the role that schools and teachers play in addressing students' basic needs and so that meaningful learning can happen for especially these students?
Thank you. I have worked with children from vulnerable populations for almost 20 years now in Malaysia, the UK, Nepal, India, in a number of countries. And in all my work with these communities, refugees, and other vulnerable populations, one of the clearest lessons that we see is that teachers and schools are often the first stable institution in a child's life. So, for many children, especially those from displaced or low-income communities, school is not just a place for learning, not just a place for academic instruction. It is where they experience routine, safety, encouragement, language exposure, and adult recognition, all of these things which are missing from their own. And in refugee learning centers, for example, teachers often work with very limited resources, but their role is immense. So they're not only teaching English or maths or science, they are helping children rebuild trust in learning, given the trauma that the children have gone through, and the trauma that they still carry into classroom, because of interrupted schooling, migration, insecurity, loss of family members, experiencing conflict, and also exclusion from formal systems. So, and if you look at girls' education, for example, girls in some refugee communities, do not continue into secondary education after puberty. So their schooling is disrupted at the point of them reaching puberty. And in that context, women teachers and community-based educators are not just delivering lessons, but they become role models for these girls. They make continued learning imaginable for girls. And so they carry a lot more, responsibility and role beyond just teaching. In another program that I run, Project Baca Baca, where we work with children from low-income families to teach reading to the children, we see that reading difficulties are rarely just about decoding words. They're connected to confidence, they're connected to access to books, parental time, parental literacy level, language exposure, digital access, and whether a child has someone who consistently believes they can improve. And when a child receives steady support like this, their engagement changes, and because the learning relationship changes. So what children need before they can learn is not only food or sleep, safety. These are fundamental, no doubt about that, but they also need dignity. They need to feel that they are not a problem to be managed, but a learner worth investing in. And as teachers, as the education institutions, we need to also believe in that.
Wow. That just made me incredibly proud to be a teacher. It just shows exactly how powerful education and teaching can be and how important it is. Thank you so much for sharing that lens. So let's go ahead and hear a little bit from a psychological perspective. So Lara, we've talked about a lot of the stressors that happen on an everyday basis, but children from vulnerable backgrounds often carry chronic stress, like Ms. Hema said, that is invisible in the classroom sometimes. How does prolonged stress or trauma affect development differently from other needs, such as situational hunger or anxiety? And what does that mean for how teachers should think about these students?
Yeah. I think it's a very important question, especially for teachers who are really dealing with kids who are coming from chronic stress environments, right? And again, before we start to give some examples about what's a chronic stress or a trauma, again, we always clarify that trauma work should be under the care of a clinician, and definitely not just under the care of teachers or parents. It is a serious case, and please, let's always resort to clinicians. They will be able to help us as much as possible. So even if I said that teachers are not trauma healers, but still, I think it's better to have a global idea about it, right? Which is, again, to broadly advise, focus on the original problem, on the unmet needs, on what's underneath the iceberg, right? And not just if they're having tantrums, so let's just punish the tantrums, right? In psychological terms, we say we need to provide supportive acceptance and confrontational change, right? Plus the skills, rather than just punishing the tantrums or the outcomes. Now to go back to the question, I do want to make sure that the teachers keep an eye on few of the chronic stresses that I will be talking about now. I think there's a population of students that they undergo into crises one after the other, right? Unfortunately, that's how life is for them. They don't have time to return to baseline after one stressor, and then you can see a second stressor is coming. For example, God forbid, a death of someone, of family, and then you can see a divorce happening, and then they are moving houses, they are moving countries, and then another marriage happening, another baby is coming. So the crises are just so alternative that they don't have time to breathe. So it's always better to keep an eye on such population of students. Another population would be those who are having grief, right? Those who are having difficulty in processing loss and processing emotional pain. Usually such children, we see them jumping from one avoidance to another, right? They just don't want to accept, so they avoid. They jump from one avoidance to another. They jump from one escape behaviors to another. It's hard for them to reach acceptance. And again, as adults, we are used to directly assuming, but let's always assess better than assume. Assess the environment, assess the background, see the patterns of escapes. Another population of students with chronic stress is those who have fear of expectations, right? Probably they have a history of not being able to achieve expectations and being punished for that. So they build a fear of mistakes. And this definitely overwhelms a child because it invalidates the struggle that they are having. So it makes it difficult for them to regulate emotionally. I think another important population to keep an eye on is those children who are constantly angry, right? I think anger is definitely the consequence of emotional dysregulation rather than the cause. Even for us adults, right? It's not that we are angry, that's why we are emotionally dysregulated. It's because we become emotionally dysregulated, we feel angry. And for the child, depending on the learning history, anger might have been so unacceptable that it just sets off further emotional reactions such as shame and guilt. put yourself in their shoes, right? I want to feel angry, but I'm not being given the space. I'm not being given the space to feel angry. So now I feel I am a bad person. I don't know how to feel. I'm the wrong one. So I will start having some self-invalidation, interpersonal conflicts, right? So in order to alert the environment that, hey, I need help, I don't know how to emotionally regulate, then they would resort to extreme emotional dramas and emotional displays just to awaken up the environment and tell them, hey, help me. I'm crying for help. Usually we use the term stably unstable because they are constantly failing, struggling to communicate their vulnerability clearly, because that's the learning history of them, right? Another way to explain this is, imagine that someone with a very healthy skin is sitting, and then next to him or her is a third-degree burn patient, right? And if there's an open window and there's a breeze coming, for me, I wouldn't feel even the breeze. But for the patient, can you imagine how much painful that event can be? And he wants to shout and scream. But then when I tell him, no, it's not significant, it's just a breeze. So what am I doing? I'm invalidating. I'm not giving the space for him to feel the pain. So he bottles it up. And then at some point he will explode, which is what we call the emotional trauma, right? The behaviors, just to alert me that, hey, I need help. Help me. I'm crying. I feel pain. So to conclude, I don't want to take more time. I think chronic stress is something to really have an eye on, especially the chronic stress from unmet needs, right? Whether it's physiological or emotional, belongingness, family relationships, love. It really brings a sense of failure, defeat, right? Low self-esteem. And I think all these elements will definitely significantly reduce the active engagement of the children in the classroom. And if it's really prolonged, then it just means that the brain will resist all kinds of help. And this only means that now we need to adjust. We, as in caregivers, parents, teachers, we need to adjust our teaching methods. If they cannot learn the way that we teach, then we can only teach them the way that they learn.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lara, and for kind of sharing that immense significance that prolonged stress can have, and how sometimes behaviors are a silent or not so silent cry for help, but maybe it might not be an explicit cry for help, and that it is important for teachers to be on the lookout for it, but also that sometimes we need to ask for help too if we don't know how to support a child, or if it delves into that realm of trauma and emotional stress that needs counseling or outside help. So let's have a look at how that looks like in a classroom. And Mike, like, equity in the classroom can feel like an abstract principle, especially for new teachers. But until you're standing in front of 20 children with very different starting points each morning, that is kind of when it becomes real. Can you share a concrete example of how you have adjusted your practice to make sure that a student who might otherwise fall through the cracks feels seen and ready to learn?
Yeah, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to give you a few examples.
Go for it.
Because as teachers, we're always learning and we're always figuring out new ways to do things, basically. So I want to share one example of something I've always done. And I think at every school, there's a parent night or a meet your teacher night or something toward the beginning of the academic school year. And one thing I always say to parents is, please let me know if there's any event happening in your child's life that may cause them to feel emotions. So I try to keep it really vague so that they can interpret it however they want. But it's it's helpful because I had a parent just a few weeks later say our dog died, and that helped me because right away I could go that student. And I think not just students, but I think humans just often want to just be heard. And so I went to that student and she was looking sad that morning. And I said, yeah, I heard, and that was really it. But just that acknowledgement and that connection that we made, I think helped because then she talked about it more. She still talks about it, and that was months ago. And she talks about it, I feel like, and I hope in a comfortable way, with me and with some of her friends. So that's one example of something I've always done. But I have an example of something, it may sound simple, but something I've started doing just this year. And I have a chair and it's kind of broken and it rolls. So, just a basic rolling chair that's broken. So I kept it instead of throwing it out. But what I found is teachers are often tired, as we all know. And sometimes we just park it and we sit down with one child or one group while we're working on math or whatever. But this rolling chair has made it so that I can zoom around my classroom and I don't even have to stand up. And so it's kind of fun to actually just like, sometimes I'm silly about it and I'll push myself against the wall and like zoom over to another kid. But even though it sounds simple, it's really helped me to connect with students throughout the day, throughout different subjects, much more than I did before. And I don't know if that's an admission of me being a bit lazy and not wanting to get up and stand up and go crouch down. Honestly, that some teachers do have back problems because of that, like bending down. But the rolling chair has been amazing. And it's something I think, I'll carry with me for the rest of my career. It's helped me so much. If you don't mind, I have one more example. Is that
Yeah.
okay, Ula? All
Yeah,
right, one
that's so
more example is at my school, we often get new students in the middle of the year, and they often don't speak much English, if any English at all. And so I try to speak their native language if I can. I know a little bit of a lot of languages. And one example is I had a Russian student come this year. And, I did my usual, like, say a few Russian words and try to get her to smile so that she would feel comfortable. And I tried that for a while and I wasn't getting much of a reaction. And it finally hit me that she might not like it that I do that. And so I actually just asked her, I said, is it okay when I speak Russian to you? And like, I know I sound silly, and that's another part of it is I like to show kids that you could make mistakes and we're not all perfect and everything. But I asked her if it was okay, and she actually smiled and it's like, yeah, it's fine. And that was I don't see this girl smile very often. So that showed me that it did mean something and it was effective to making her feel more comfortable in the classroom. So it's a lot of trial and error, really. I find every year with new students, you got to just figure it out with them and um, not being afraid to just ask them, and then also not being afraid to just zip it and listen to them. I think as teachers, we talk and talk and talk all day long, but sometimes it's good for us to just stop and just let them talk because I think often humans just want to be heard. And that in itself can, of course, that doesn't cure the problem, but it can make people feel better and make them feel more comfortable. Yeah, that's all I got for that.
Thank you so much. And I think this is a great point to kind of end the panel discussion on with some concrete examples and solutions to some of the problems that we've talked about. And I think it's been a very rich discussion where we covered a lot of breadth, but also a lot of depth with concrete examples and tying it to theory. And I think that's what education is all about, is really understanding, okay, what is the theoretical framework? What happens inside a human being? But then also be, okay, but how does that look like? And how does that feel and sound like, and what can we do in response to really be supportive? And I've seen a lot of head nodding from everyone throughout. Like, I feel like we're all on the same page and we all kind of said the same things. And some of like the really important aspects that have come up today is that, children, they want to ultimately learn. Most of them, I would say all of them, they want to learn, they want to be regulated, but they do need that support, that adult support through co-regulation, through modeling, and that children will still learn even if not all of their needs are met. But ultimately, the idea is that their needs are met so that the learning and their cognitive readiness is there, and that we support them to help them be in a place where learning is possible. So I love how Lara kind of like told us about the science behind the brain system and got some really interesting ideas that I'm going to try in my classroom. I love how kind of Hema connected it.
Let me know how it goes.
Yes, I will try and I'll let you know.
Yeah, it's a trial and error, as Mike said. So yes, do try it.
Exactly, exactly. I love how Hema kind of connected it to teacher education, what teachers need, but also broadened the lens from refugee students, and that we've really got to consider a child's background. And Mike kind of also back that up, saying those parent connections are really important, and understanding what's happening in a child's day as much as we can, and brought in some really, really great examples. And that teachers are detectives, I'm going to use that forever. But also something that I really loved, that ultimately it's okay to be honest. It's okay to admit that we don't always know it all. And it's okay to ask children for feedback, and to be like, how do you like this? Is it working? Is it not working? Because children, I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think we often underestimate them. I think they probably know so much more about themselves and about life than we might think. And by simply asking them, sometimes that's all we need. And then, like Mike said, and we just listen. So I loved all of these thoughts. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions, but I definitely think that we covered a lot of detail. And I just want to really sincerely thank all three of you for making it online, and for having this discussion. I'm going away with so many golden nuggets. And I hope that, that everyone who attended today does too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ula.
Thank
Thank you.
Ula.
You best of luck.
Thank you. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.